There's just been a lot of failures in the news media now, and I've kind of given up on the idea that the news media is going to save us. They're not going to save us. The best I can hope for is that they won't completely buy into this whole right-wing disinformation atmosphere that we're seeing. You see Twitter taken over by Musk. You see CNN pretending that it's going to chase after some mythical centrist viewpoint when clearly they're tacking to the right. I think that the news media has never been liberal and it's getting more right-wing. And I think that because of Trump, it changed the game, and some journalists started putting on the uniform, put on the jersey. So they were like into the game rather than just covering the game. I mean, that's what they're doing, is trying to make them legitimize people who clearly wanted to overturn a free and fair election. It's accepting of fascism. It's making the fascists part of the club of democracy.
Welcome to episode 159 of the Refuse Fascism podcast, a podcast brought to you by volunteers with Refuse Fascism. I'm Sam Goldman, one of those volunteers and host of the show. Refuse Fascism exposes, analyzes, and stands against the very real danger and threat of fascism coming to power in the United States. I'm glad to be back, and well, what a week. In today's episode, we're sharing an interview with Mark Jacob to discuss the mainstream media's normalization and accommodation to fascism. Mark is a former editor at the Chicago Tribune and Sun-Times and a co-author of 8 books on history and photography. Thanks to everyone who goes the extra step and rates and reviews the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. If you appreciate the show and want to help us reach more people who want to refuse fascism, go be a gem and write a review. Drop 5 stars wherever you listen to your pods. Here's a recent one as proof that we read everyone. Sam 140171998 wrote over on Apple Podcasts a review titled "Covers the Most Important Topics," gave us 5 stars, and wrote, "Conversations you don't hear on mainstream media, important, intelligent topics with great guests, makes you think and want to get engaged." Well, thanks, fellow Sam. Please tell the people out there in podcast land why you listen, and they should too. Subscribe, follow, so you never miss an episode. And of course, keep up all that great commenting, sharing on social media. And thanks to everyone over on Patreon for supporting the show for $2 or more a month. Thanks, patrons. Not one yet? Become one at patreon.com/refusefascism. Before we get into it, we have to talk about the Trump indictment, which crystal clear shows our timeline is filled with the unprecedented. The fact that those who rule this country are at each other's throats can no longer be denied. They can no longer rule and hold things together in the way they have since the Civil War. The old ways, the old quote-unquote norms are coming apart. Let's get into this more. For the first time in U.S. history, a former president has been indicted with federal charges. He faces a 37-count federal indictment involving possessing classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, conspiring to hide them from federal authorities in a grand jury, revealing national defense documents to unauthorized folks, and making false statements about it all to investigators. Trump is expected to be arraigned in Miami, Florida, this Tuesday. It's significant that Trump, who has always declared himself above the law and transformed the GOP and its base into a party of fascist lawlessness and violence, culminating in the January 6th coup attempt, faces serious charges and multiple investigations. The joy felt by many at the prospect of seeing this fascist criminal face any accountability for anything, and the hunger to see him lock the fuck up, is righteous. It reflects an enormous reservoir of popular sentiment that could be turned into necessary action to change the course of history. But here's the thing. We must not pin our hopes on a mechanism that cannot and will not address the reasons we so badly want to see Trump locked up. Now, is a time for vigilance, not complacency. Trump and the Republifascists have shown us again and again that they know how to turn a crisis into fascist opportunity. On Friday, Trump posted to his millions of followers on his social media site Truth Social in an all-caps message, quote, "See you in Miami on Tuesday, 3 exclamation points," end quote. An ominous throwback to his infamous, quote-unquote, "be there, be wild" tweet, calling on people to converge in D.C. on January 6th. As of now, Trump remains the GOP frontrunner for the 2024 presidential elections. Yesterday, Trump spoke at Nazi rallies, state GOP conventions in Georgia and North Carolina. To the thousands of Trump devotees gathered, donning their God, guns, and Trump caps, Trump painted his bid for presidency as a quote-unquote final battle with quote-unquote corrupt forces that are destroying the country, leveraging every racist, xenophobic, anti-Semitic, anti-LGBTQ, anti-woman dog whistle to do so. Speaking of the Democrats, in 2023, he said, quote, "Either the communists win and destroy America, or we destroy the communists," end quote. He called Jack Smith, the special counsel, deranged, and said the Justice Department was a, quote, "sick nest of people that need to be cleaned out," end quote. In his speech drenched in grievances and vengeance, he said, quote, "I put everything on the line and I will never yield. I will never be detained. I will never stop fighting for you," end quote. Going on to say, quote, "Now the Marxist left is once again using the same corrupt DOJ and the same corrupt FBI and the Attorney General and the local district attorneys to interfere." Going on to say, "They're cheating, they're crooked, they're corrupt. These criminals cannot be rewarded. They must be defeated. You have to defeat them because in the end, they're not coming after me. They're coming after you, and I'm just standing in their way," end quote. Key figures in the Republifascist Party have rallied behind the lie that the indictments are political persecution meant to influence the 2024 election. This brazen disregard for facts reflects a totalizing fascist worldview, insulating the Republifascist base from empirical truth. As Paul Street pointed out in a piece that is linked in the show notes, quote, "One after another, key congressional Republicans, including the worm-like Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, have reflexively joined their dear leader's preposterous claims of unjust and radical left persecution and the weaponization of the law against the chosen one. With some exceptions, Trump's party has lined up behind their maximalist cult leader in demonstrating cold-blooded opposition to the elementary rule of merely bourgeois law," end quote. Trump's main competitor for head fascists, Ron DeSantis, tweeted, quote, "The weaponization of federal law enforcement represents a mortal threat to a free society. We have for years witnessed an uneven application of the law depending upon political affiliation," end quote. As Tess Owens from Vice has pointed out, quote, "The response from his supporters has taken on wilder and even more dangerous dimensions," end quote, than his previous indictment. Here's some examples of that. Fox News host Mark Levin screamed on the Hannity show, and I'm not going to do it the way that he did. I'm going to spare your ears. Quote, "What do you mean he's not above the law? There is no law. What's going on here is a disgusting disgrace. It is a war on Trump. It is a war on the Republican Party, and it is a war on the Republic. The radical left is doing what the radical left does. While they cover up for Biden the way they covered up for Hillary, I'm done. And I'm sick of it. June 8th is the day of insurrection, not January 6th. We've never seen anything like this in the United States. We saw it under Stalin. We've seen it under other autocracies, Marxist regimes, fascist regimes in the Third World. They've taken the United States into a hellhole. It's humiliating. And I'm going to tell you something. There are tens of millions of us. You have crossed the Rubicon twice, which has never been done before. And we will never forgive you. Never, ever. That's the bottom line, and I'm done," end quote. Let's be clear, laughing aside, this is an all-out call for armed fascists to rise up in violence. And it's not just a Fox News host saying things like this. Carrie Lake at the Georgia Republican State Convention on Friday said, quote, "If you want to get to President Trump, you're going to have to get through me and 75 million Americans just like me. And most of us are card-carrying members of the NRA. That's not a threat. That's a public service announcement," end quote. Yeah, you heard that right. We will kill you if you hold Trump accountable, is what they're saying. And it's not just her. Representative Andy Biggs tweeted, quote, "We have now reached a war phase. Eye for an eye," end quote. Representative Clay Higgins tweeted, President Trump said he has been, quote unquote, summoned to appear at the federal courthouse in Miami on Tuesday at 3 p.m., end quote. "This is a perimeter probe from the oppressor's hold. Our POTUS has this. Buckle up. 1 to 50K, know your bridges. Rock steady, calm. That is all." As Jeff Charlotte pointed out on Twitter, 1 to 50K refers to military maps and publicly available U.S. Geological Survey maps of areas mostly surrounding military installations. As Jeff says, this isn't a metaphor. Not slow civil war. It's a congressman calling for the real deal, the real thing. Military jargon, talking about like seizing bridges, seizing military installations to carry out war. And let's also get real. The biggest threat is not the hypocrisy of a man and one of the two major political parties that weaponized justice to persecute political enemies and let off allies, now decrying a weaponized judicial system, or the party of law and order going after law and order. It's the fact that they're fascists. Law for me, not for thee. Rights for me, not for thee. Power for me, not for thee. The fascist movement has barely been named in the media, much less thoroughly repudiated by a mass movement of millions standing up against it. It is a vicious 21st century American fascism in the most powerful and dangerous nation in the world that's been normalized and accommodated for over 7 years now. None of its leaders, including Trump, have yet faced the ultimate crisis. The people of this country taking over the public square and public discourse to delegitimize these fascists and drive them out of power. Yet, at these moments of crisis, when democratic norms are being ruptured and society is being further cleaved, the decent people are encouraged to retreat, to remain passive, and prematurely celebrate an outcome that is far from inevitable. Every crisis Trump and his fascist party gets through strengthens the U.S. fascist movement, leaving a core of battle-tested and even more dangerous, genocidal, revanchist lunatics in power to set the terms for all of society. I mean, just think of the fact that according to a recent report published by The Guardian, more than 2 years after the deadly January 6th coup attempt, 12 million people in this country, the United States, believe the use of violence is justified to restore Trump to power. Just look at what has happened to abortion rights in this country. Look at how they are gutting voting rights. Look at what they're doing to the trans community. We must not be lulled into submission by this or future indictments and prosecutions of Trump. Whether or not Trump is able to remain the GOP presidential candidate, this indictment cannot and will not stop this fascist movement. That's up to us, y'all. In addition to being an unprecedented legal challenge to the system, this presents yet one more crisis of legitimacy to the governing institutions of our society, brought to the surface by the rise of fascism, but deeply intertwined with the fundamental illegitimacy at the heart of American empire. If Trump is somehow exonerated in yet one more situation where the publicly available facts incontrovertibly show guilt, he will be empowered yet again, and the rottenness of the system will be exposed once more. In the scenario that he is found guilty, while this will be a victory for the rule of law, and many will recognize that, millions will believe that the verdict is the weaponization of the justice system against Trump. In a legitimacy crisis, the key question is not guilt or innocence, not what is true, or about how many people believe that. Those all matter. The key question is which narrative will exert power. If Trump's notion of conviction as political attack holds sway, the conviction can potentially help propel him back into power, playing the victim, and help justify the political vengeance he has already sworn that he will reap in a second term. That is one possible outcome, if the fascists win the public narrative. Meanwhile, according to the New York Times article titled "Biden Sticks to Stay Nothing Strategy on the Trump Indictment," quote, President Biden and his advisors have concluded that commenting on the indictment would only feed into Republican accusations of political motivated persecution, end quote. In other words, we have the most powerful people on the earth modeling to their tens of millions of supporters once more exactly how to accommodate fascism and legitimize false fascist narratives at the worst possible time to do so, with the whole future on the line. These are the same folks who have told us that we need a strong Republican Party and want to be bipartisan. But when the Republicans are doing what they exist to do, namely that fascism, the Democratic leadership cannot comment. We already know an election alone cannot stop fascism, and no, a conviction alone cannot stop fascism. Only an activated, mobilized people in action together to create a better future for humanity can stop fascism. It's critical at this moment to spread the understanding of this fascist movement to the millions who righteously want to see Trump behind bars and to actively oppose this fascism in every sphere of life. So this is your reminder to stay vigilant, to in word and deed make clear, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. With that, here's my interview with Mark. Today, I'm talking with Mark Jacob, former Metro editor for the Chicago Tribune, former editor for Sun-Times, to discuss how the mainstream media has and is greasing the tracks that fascism is continuing to advance on, and the media that's needed now. So welcome, Mark. I'm so glad to have you with us.
Thank you for asking me.
You have been uniquely positioned as a participant and observer of mainstream news and opinion publishing over now decades. And we've seen, and I think we both agree on this, the normalization of and legitimization of Trump and everything he represents across mainstream media. We've also seen the emergence of new media that before, in terms of cable news, we couldn't imagine. The emergence of Newsmax, One American News. We now see changes at CNN, the decimation of local news, the buyout at Twitter, and so much more. And I think that much of this is changed to accommodate and even propel fascism into power in the United States. And I was hoping that you could talk to us about what you've observed in this regard and how you have seen things changing. Has this been a gradual change that you noticed? Kind of just walk us through your thinking on that.
One of the biggest myths in American life is the idea that the news media is liberal. The thing about the news media is that they're constantly under attack from the right, who say that they're being unfair. And so the news executives, I've found, in many cases have bowed to that and been ultra sensitive to it. When I was Metro editor at the Tribune, I would tell people, you're going to make somebody mad with a story, but that's fine, because if you're not making anyone mad, you're not doing your job. That's part of being a journalist, is saying things that people don't want you to reveal to the public that are true. Journalism requires some level of courage and a thick skin as well. I would like to see more of that. I think we have a news media that's really kind of knuckles under to that kind of pressure. I was in the news business a long time. I saw a lot of things. At the Tribune, was the editor who edited the first story about birtherism when Obama was about to be elected. We knew it was BS. It was clearly BS. We knew it was. We didn't want to write about it. And one of the top editors came to me and said, I'm going to give you a reporter. You got him to write a story, and you've got to edit it about birtherism. And I said, you know this is BS. You know it's just made up stuff. The answer was, well, people are wondering. They want us to explain what's going on and fact check it for them, because otherwise they'll just think, that we're covering something up. It's out there, so you have to write about it. And the right-wing news media knows how to put things out there. They're doing it right now with that whole kind of Biden crime family BS. They know how to put things out there, and then mainstream media just bites on it. It's ridiculous. And so we wrote a story. We did all the fact checking. I went back and looked at the story, and it was a perfectly fine story. We talked to the officials in Hawaii. Think about it. In order to believe the birtherism thing, you would have had to thought that conspirators put a birth announcement for a biracial child in a Honolulu newspaper in 1960 because they knew he was going to be elected president. It was idiotic. Yet we had to write a story about it. And let me tell you, that story did not allay any suspicions. It didn't do anything to make anyone think, oh, this must be baloney. All it did is bring it more out into the atmosphere and just spread it. And you see how Donald Trump used that as one way to gain prominence, because that's the way lies are. And that's why the news media have to be very careful about what they take seriously. And they don't need to have this obligation to report everything that they hear. All the things that people say are not legitimate. I mean, there's a lot that's not legitimate now that's said. You have a Republican Party that's pretty much decided that telling lies is a sacrament to them. It's something that they view as a badge of honor, as how to get admitted into the club is that you've got to lie. CNN, for example, put Trump on a live broadcast to lie, and they think, oh, we're going to fact check him. Of course they weren't going to fact check him. He's talking faster than they can fact check him. He gets away with it. He says a bunch of lies. They fact check, a fraction of them, and it's a big win for him. And this is the news media just failing to do its job and platforming people. Just putting somebody on the air and deciding that that's an act of fairness is not. It may be an act of fairness to the politician. It's not an act of fairness to the public. And who are you working for? You should be working for the public. You should be trying to get people information that will help them navigate their lives and protect their democracy. And if you're not doing that, if you're just trying to please some sort of political operative who's going to call you on the phone, you're not doing your job. There's just been a lot of failures in the news media now, and I've kind of given up on the idea that the news media is going to save us. They're not going to save us. I just hope they won't kill us. To me, the best I can hope for is that they won't completely buy into this whole right-wing disinformation atmosphere that we're seeing. But then you see Twitter taken over by Musk. You see CNN pretending that it's going to chase after some mythical centrist viewpoint when clearly they're tacking to the right. I think that the news media has never been liberal, and it's getting more right-wing.
One of the things that you've done recently in your writing, and you do it on Twitter a lot, is making parallels that oftentimes can make people uncomfortable. You have spoken about the media and the role that it plays in the rise of fascism in historical examples of Nazi Germany, because it's the most clear example to people. And you've said that. You've said why you make that comparison. And I'm wondering now, in the moment that we're in, with the changes that you've pointed to, what should I call the decent people who do want the journalism that gives you the information about what's actually happening? What should we be concerned about right now in terms of the media's coverage?
There's a hesitance to use the word fascism. I was glad that Biden used the term semi-fascism, except I didn't like the semi part. I went back and read William Shirer's book, Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. I did a long Twitter thread and picked out passages and related them to what's happening today, because as far as the fascist takeover of schools, as far as the fascist takeover of churches and other thought leaders, and the tendency to minimize the threat. 2 weeks before Hitler took the chancellorship, they thought that they had solved the whole problem, that they were going to minimize him, they were going to bring him into the government, and that would be it. And instead, he took over the government, never won a fair election in the whole time. I do feel like in these times, there are people still who are thinking, well, this is all overblown. It's just a political stuff, and I don't pay attention to politics. You may not pay attention to politics, but politics is paying attention to you. And it's super important for people to pay attention to what's going on. And again, I love history. I've written about history. I've written books about history. And I wouldn't be bringing up the Nazis except for two things. One, everyone understands what that was. And two, they're acting like Nazis. As soon as they want to stop acting like Nazis, I'll stop comparing them to Nazis. Just look at it. Look what they're doing to trans people now. They're doing the same kind of thing that the Nazis did to the Jews. And again, when I compare to the Republican fascists to Germany, I'm not comparing them to what happened in 1938 or 1942 or 1944. I hope we never get to anywhere close to that point. I'm comparing them to 1933, when the Nazis took over, took away everyone's rights, started burning books, and we know what happened after that. So just to be clear, when I make that comparison, I'm comparing the rise of Nazism to the rise of Republican fascism. I'll stop making that comparison as soon as they stop acting like that. And I admire your organization for using the word fascism, because that's what it is. You see all these examples, and it's not just Hitler. I think DeSantis is more like Mussolini than Hitler, really. The whole way of coercing corporations and bringing the business community in, and in effect making government kind of the sponsor of business and the sponsor of corporations. Look what he's doing to Disney. I mean, that's totally strong-arming a company because you want them to agree with you on a political issue that has nothing to do, with their business. It's not your place to decide whether a private business agrees with you politically on an issue. Yet he's trying to sabotage their business because of this, very much like Mussolini would do. These kind of comparisons, yeah. I mean, I understand that the whole thing about using the term fascism, I think people think it's overblown, but there are people who don't really study fascism. If you talk to somebody who's actually studied fascism, they'll say, yeah. And you've interviewed some of them, and they know what's happening because they study history. So it's not overblown. It's what's happening, and people need to face up to it.
Yeah, people need to not only confront what's happening, but to act to stop it. And if people cannot even name what it is,
right,
they are totally incapable of stopping it. Returning to the media point, it's striking how many euphemisms will be used short of calling it fascism, extremism. They're not just cop-out words.
Populist. Populist.
Yeah, populist. They're words that confuse instead of clarify. They are disarming to people. And another one of those things is like not even be able to call him a racist, Trump. These are just true things. It's not an insult. It's not a name-calling game. It's what is real. The other thing that you had said that made me stop for a moment was you were talking about what trans folks have come under as the biggest target in many ways, or the most coherent target, I should say, this movement. That has also been a target that the media has fostered and amplified by giving credence and print space and airtime and to not fact check basic things.
Right. And, just in the CNN town hall that I watched just recently, the Mike Pence thing, that they asked the question, you're big on parent rights. Why aren't you for parent rights when they want to deal with gender affirming care for their kids? And, that's different. He never explained why it's different. It's only because we want to demonize trans kids.
I wanted to go back in time. In 2016, MediaQuaint, a company that follows political advertising and earned, in other words, free media, analyzed the time Trump appeared on air for free and calculated that it was worth $2 billion, far and away outstripping all other candidates in terms of free coverage. What difference did that make in his rise to power and the consolidation of this nationwide fascist movement, galvanized by his campaign?
It made a huge movement. And just to really say something I believe strongly is that I don't think that Trump created a fascist Republican Party. I think a fascist Republican Party created Trump. I think that Trump was just the embodiment of these movements in the Republican Party, and the more moderate people in the Republican Party saw the wave and just jumped on it and were too cowardly to fight against it. Trump is not like a creator of anything. I think he's more an embodiment of it. You look what happened with Trump. He starts getting publicity and getting on Fox News over this birther thing, as we mentioned earlier, which was completely bogus. But he kept on saying, I have a source that says that birth certificate's fake and all this other crap, and got on air for that. And he's on The Apprentice. One of the things about American culture is that there are a lot of people who think that when you get on television, that makes you legit. That means that you're real. Somebody decided to put you on there, so you must have something to say, or you must be really good. As anyone who's read about The Apprentice knows, they were covering up for him the whole time, and they had created just this myth. Trust me, The Apprentice was not a documentary. It was an entertainment show in which they tried to make him look good. And because of that, any facts have shown that Trump is a terrible businessman, cheating people he does business with, and by other methods, and by lying to people about condos, and that this has managed to somehow stay afloat. And I think probably by getting secret payments from overseas. It's not like he's a great businessman. He's clearly not. But that created this myth of him being a great businessman and him being on TV. Then he announces for office, and suddenly CNN, especially, and Fox and all them, they just love putting him on the air because he's always got something outrageous to say, and they can, oh my God, this is terrible, and they can get somebody to say something else, and it creates this big fight on the air. Conflict is drama to these people, and it's entertainment. But I think that if you can't get beyond the psychological effect of him being on television all the time to make less sophisticated people think that he was legit, that he really knew what he was doing, that they wouldn't put him on TV if he didn't have things to say that were important, and to just creating this idea that he was important. This kind of fake it till you make it kind of thing, where he suddenly became important because he pretended he was important. The real tragedy in the story is how the entire Republican Party, anything that might have been a little bit decent in the Republican Party, totally folded and totally just gave up to him and just, shut up and just let him go. This is the thing that just blows my mind. Even after he was caught on tape bragging about sexually molesting women he didn't know, that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough to get the white evangelical vote to not vote for him. It's this amazing kind of lack of decency by segments of the American public, especially by the whole Republican Party, which is so terribly complicit in this rise of fascism.
This notion you hear about the media learning lessons from 2016. Have they learned their lesson? Are they learning their lesson? It clearly means different things to different people. Some key lessons I thought we had made a tiny little bit of progress on were that objectivity is different than equal time or centrism, and that it's good to be partisan to the truth, and it's good to be partisan against fascism. But one disturbing thing in that Atlantic piece profiling Chris Licht was that as critical as the author may have been about Licht, he was clearly working from the same flawed principles. And I'm just wondering, what are the lessons that good journalists and editors took or could take from the Trump experience and this moment? The horse race has already begun.
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, the horse race coverage, just horrible. Jay Rosen at NYU says, pay attention to the stakes, not the odds. And that's so important. I mean, most of my takeaway off the last, decade or since 2015 is negative. To me, it's the triumph of propaganda. It's the fact that lies work, that if you repeat a lie often enough, it gets believed. I mean, look at how many people, regular Republicans in polls, say they believe in the big lie. Obviously not true, just based on any rational analysis of evidence. But they're not doing rational analysis of evidence. They're saying Donald Trump said so, and so did, Lindsey Graham or who else. And they're just going with it because they want it to be true. It suddenly becomes true. I think one of the big takeaways is the triumph of propaganda and the fact that, unfortunately, as someone who was in the news business for a very long time, it was my realization that the news media has limited power, especially in an age with social media. Back in the day, if a politician wanted to get their message out, they pretty much had to go through mainstream media, and they just don't anymore. And they also have co-opted mainstream media to where it's working for them, not for the audience. I mean, that's a lesson, is that the media has limited ability to expose lies because some people just like to believe lies. I feel that there are a lot of members of the news media who just have learned nothing. They just long for the days when it was just Republicans and Democrats and they could go to their cocktail parties and sorted out all their differences in a bill, and then they passed it, and then they all shook hands, and it was just more collegial, or at least had the appearance of it. And I think that the news media liked that. They liked it when it was just Republicans and Democrats were just Sharks versus Jets. And it was just two different sports teams. They could cover it completely like a sporting event. Problem now is that it's truth versus lies. Chris Licht in that interview says, one of the things that really struck me in that profile was him saying that I think that because of Trump, he changed the game and some journalists started putting on the uniform, put on the jersey. So they were like into the game rather than just covering the game. When the game is not Republicans and Democrats, it's decency versus hate, and it's lies versus truth. There's a place for the news media to be in the game. They better be in the game. They're in the truth business. Their game is to tell the truth. So if they're not getting involved, if they're just like bystanders selling advertising and then letting newsmakers say whatever they want, then they're surrendering what their real role is. For me personally, and I think other people have come to the same conclusion as me, this whole disaster, this rise of fascism in the United States that threatens our democracy, and that's what it is. It's a rise of fascism that threatens our democracy. And I don't know what's going to happen in the next few years, but I'm scared to death. And minimizing it is stupid. We all should be scared to death. I don't really believe in journalistic objectivity anymore. I used to. I don't anymore. And when you think about it, it doesn't make any sense because as an editor, I came into the office, I'd read the news and I'd be thinking about this, or I'd notice something on the way to work and I'd talk to a reporter and I'd say, go cover that, go write a story about that. I wasn't telling him to write every story about everything. I was making decisions. The very act of me assigning a news story was making a value judgment. I was making a decision on what was important to our readers. And that's not objective. That's me making a decision. It's not an objective move. And so to think that you're objective all the time is just fooling yourself. It always kills me to see like longtime reporters, like somebody who's been on a beat for 20 years, writing things that act as if they just showed up yesterday, to where they write in such a faux objective way that they don't want to be, seem like they're prejudiced against anyone or like they have any opinions. They just want to like say what everyone said. Would you trust a reporter who's been covering the same subject for 20 years and hasn't reached certain conclusions about what's going on their beat? I wouldn't. And the truth is they have reached conclusions. They know who's lying. They know who's telling the truth. They know what the problems are on that subject. If they're in transit, they know what the issues are in transit. And to pretend otherwise is trying to fool the readers. That's not a reader service. I much more believe than objectivity is reporters disclosing their biases and their own views. There's a movement in this in journalism, kind of a where I'm coming from movement, where journalists would even issue statements saying, I've always been pro-choice, I came from a middle-class background, I've never really been around poor people very much, and I'm trying to learn more about them, but it's not something that I grew up doing. Just a statement that says, this is where I'm coming from. And it's not from an objective place, it's from a subjective place. And to me, that's way more honest for journalists to do than to pretend that there's some sort of God in the sky who just can filter out all of the things that would make them be prejudiced, and they can come to objective conclusions. To me, that's lying to the audience.
I think that's a really great way of putting it. One problem that you pointed out across many mainstream media platforms is a refusal to call a lie a lie. And the notion that somehow doing so is passing judgment.
Right.
And somehow that's not objective.
Right.
And it seems one example of a bigger problem in the media regarding the truth. Meanwhile, you have this larger problem in society at large where you have people across a wide swath of political viewpoints who have no clue where to start to understand what's real and what's not.
Right.
Media literacy and scientific literacy have, in my opinion, completely nosedived. I was wondering on how you see the two of these connected and how could the media maybe play a role in changing that for the better? How do we understand what's true media literacy and that scientific literacy?
I do think that the rise of fact-checking is important. As I mentioned, it didn't stop Trump because there were too many people who didn't really want the facts. They just wanted their lies reinforced or their prejudices or their fantasies. You're never going to be able to effectively inform people who don't want to know the truth. I do think that media literacy is super important, and I think it's been underappreciated in school. Every high school should have a BS 101 class, should have a class that just only purpose is to, okay, here's what you saw on social media. Here's what you saw on this report on the news media. Here's why it's true or it's not. Here's how you can assess it. What kind of experts did they use? Is that scientific study, with 3 people or with 300,000 people? You say crime's up. Well, is it really up? Is it up per capita? Is Chicago the crime capital? No, it's got more murders than any other city in America, but its per capita homicide rate is way down compared to a lot of other cities. But it's become this kind of thing to demonize by right-wingers because it's a black mayor and the previous mayor was black too. It's been run by Democrats. So suddenly it becomes this kind of symbol of dysfunction. If you look at per capita homicide rate, red states are at the top of that list. And this happened in that Pence town hall when he was ragging on Chicago and Dana Bash said, well, about half the guns used in crimes in Illinois came from Indiana, which has lax gun laws, which was great for her to point out. She said right after that, she said, well, let's move on. Instead of, Pence, what do you think about that? Well, or ask Mike Pence, you're always criticizing Democratic-run cities. Why are the top 5 states with homicide rates red states? Push Republicans to deal with real statistics. But back to your question, I do think that there is some education for people, especially young people, in just being more skeptical about media and about what they're told. And just analyzing, well, where does that come from? Who said it? Is it really true? There are things out there that will tell you. There is a fact-checking industry. It's just that sometimes it's so separated from the lies that it's not effective. Like at that CNN town hall with Mike Pence, Pence said he had always been in favor of exceptions to abortion bans for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. And that was just a flat out lie. But CNN did not fact check it in real time. Their fact checker, Daniel Dale, did it afterward. So the lie just lived by itself. The fact checker's attempt to catch up with it.
It's really upsetting, isn't the word. It's really kind of like pull your hair out feeling, nerve-wracking, thinking about more of those town halls.
Well, my suggestion for the town halls was, if they want to do it in real time, they can do it in real time, but they ought to have a panel of experts who know it, and they should have what I call the truth buzzer. And the panel of experts, whenever they hear somebody say something that's a lie, they hit the truth buzzer. The anchor says, okay, we're going to stop this right now. Let's go over and talk to the panel. And the panel would say, well, no, this isn't true. This isn't true. And you said in 2016 this, and would go through it, adjudicate it, and then they'd go back and the politician could talk some more. Of course, no politician would agree to those kind of ground rules, but that's the only way to hold those.
Even a basic follow-up. I think that maybe in the town hall with Pence, there was one follow-up. The one that I recall was the clarification. Pence had said something regarding dismissing the indictments. He was briefly challenged to say, well, does that go with what you said about no one being above the law?
Right. He said no one is above the law, but then he said there were unique circumstances that meant that Trump should not be indicted. Right. And which means that, sounds to me like he means that somebody is above the law.
Right. That was the one follow. So I don't want to say that there was no follow-ups because that was true. But overwhelmingly, that isn't done. Speaking of the CNN stuff, I did want to get your thoughts. It's big news that Licht is out at CNN. Right. A lot can be drawn from his tenure, even just from the Trump town hall and the piece about him by Tim Lamberta in The Atlantic. You had tweeted something that I thought was really apt, and I wanted to get more of your thoughts on it. You had written, quote, Chris Licht wasn't ousted because he refused to do what his bosses wanted, make CNN more accepting of fascism. He's out because he didn't do it effectively enough, end quote. And I was wondering if you could speak more to what are they going for in making CNN more accepting of fascism? You know, what does Warner Brothers Discovery, what are they trying to do with this CNN?
You know, I scratched my head a little bit because what they seem to be doing is they have the kind of the centrist lane to some extent, or had, but they're veering to the right, which is a very crowded lane right now. So I don't understand what they're doing. I don't understand what they're doing from a marketing perspective. I think I understand what they're doing from a political perspective. I had this suspicion that they're okay not making money as long as they kind of please their big part owner, John Malone, who's a Trump donor. When you see what's happened with Twitter, Elon Musk has been satisfied to lose 2/3 of the value of Twitter just to have a bigger voice himself in a personal way. I just wonder whether CNN, which is not a major company inside of, Warner Brothers Discovery, but I just wonder whether they just want to please right-wing rich people and really not have it be, a thorn in the side to whoever the Republican candidate is. That's the thing. That's what's so scary, is that we do not have liberal media. We did not have liberal media 10 years ago. We didn't have it 5 years ago. We have less of it now. I don't think that CNN is trying to make money by doing this. I don't know what they're doing other than perhaps just trying to please John Malone, who owns part of the company and definitely wants it to be what he calls centrist. What he calls centrist is not centrist. It's accepting of fascism. It's making the fascists part of the club of democracy. I mean, that's what they're doing, is trying to make them legitimize people who clearly wanted to overturn a free and fair election. I mean, that's what they want to do, is legitimize those people. They want to wash away the stink of what they did on January 6th and move forward and have nobody in a suit get punished. 1,000 people who went out and committed violence have been charged, but I'm still waiting for a politician in a suit to be charged and thrown in the clinker, which sure as hell should happen. And until that does happen, why wouldn't you think it's going to happen again? I don't know what CNN's aim is. It's clear that what Chris Licht did was to spout the company line. It wasn't that he wasn't doing what they said. It was he wasn't selling it well enough. He wasn't doing it subtly enough. He wasn't sucking up to the on-air personalities enough, and he just wasn't diplomatic enough. I mean, one of the things that he really did that was not smart was criticize their past coverage of COVID and stuff like that. And He said they didn't give enough credence to the idea that death toll from COVID was inflated. Well, the death toll from COVID was not inflated. If anything, it's been underestimated. When you look at excess deaths as a statistic, it's higher than what the official COVID death rate is. If anything, it was underestimated, I think. But the conspiracy theorists, want to pretend that COVID was no big deal and that it was all a government conspiracy. Giving kind of legitimacy to all these conspiracy theories by letting those people on the air by CNN is pretty much what news channels were doing when they let Donald Trump on, a decade ago to accuse Obama of not being an American citizen. It's a total BS theory that they're giving on their airways.
You had mentioned indictments and people needing to be indicted for their role in orchestrating the coup. I just wanted your take on what's with the constant media speculation about Trump possibly getting indicted and at this time and for this or arrested, but very little explanation about what crimes he's allegedly committed. All this is it going to be today? It's going to be tomorrow. Well, it's going to be at this time. But very little, he is going to be charged for this because.
Right. And because this is illegal, because it violates this law. And also, they haven't done a good enough job, to me, of setting out, for people who aren't news junkies like me, they haven't set out the timeline. And they haven't really explained adequately how this is different from the thing that involved Biden and Pence. Biden and Pence, they both owned up to it, whereas Trump, not only lied about it, he had his lawyer issue a statement to the federal government saying he didn't have anything more when he did. There's just so many ways that his case is different on the documents thing. Reality check, the Republican Party tried to overthrow democracy. Reality check, that's what they did. And if anyone wants to dispute that sentence, I can explain to you why that's exactly what happened. Yet nothing's happened to them. They're still running for office. They're still taking away people's rights. They're still gerrymandering to try to prevent black people from having political power. They're still doing all of the same crap and even worse. And nobody's been held to account who really mattered. These foot soldiers, 3%ers and oath keepers and that, I'm glad that they're being thrown in prison. They belong in prison. And you still have the leading candidate for the Republican Party nomination saying he's going to pardon them, which is another thing that's outrageous. Real accountability has not come yet, and it's over 2 years since it happened. Justice delayed is justice denied. I think they should have hurried more. And I understand justice is slow and they got to have all their T's crossed and their I's dotted and all that stuff, and I get that. In the recent move, it sounds like they're moving the documents case down to Florida because that's where most of the crimes occurred, and they don't want to get thrown out of court just because they file in D.C. And that makes plenty of sense. And I understand that this is way more complicated than I know. I'm not a lawyer. But just for the sake of American democracy and its safety, people need to go to jail. I think members of Congress need to go to jail.
And for people who want to write opinion pieces and get them run, any tips on getting op-eds published?
They need to say something that no one else is saying. If you've read what you're writing, then don't submit it. Find a new angle. Stay nice and tight. Stay short. Stay 700 words or something like that. Don't write a novel. Write something that people will get to the end of, but be heartfelt. Or write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper, or submit an op-ed there. And everything doesn't have to be national. Some of the best ways to get published in local newspapers and local publications is to write about local issues. And a lot of things that we've been talking about on a national basis rear their ugly head locally. The book bans and stuff like that, those are all local issues. Stay active locally, too. Everything that's important is not on MSNBC and CNN. There are things that you can pay attention to in your own neighborhood that will make democracy stronger for all of us.
I want to thank you so much, Mark, for taking the time to talk to us, to share your expertise, your perspective and insight. If people want to connect with you, where should they go?
They should follow me, I hope, on Twitter. I'm still on there until Elon Musk gets even worse. Still think we need to have a voice there. And I'm at MarkJacob 16. I'd love for you to follow me, and I follow a lot of people. And we got to be loud there. We can't surrender the platform to liars and haters. That's a battleground for us to fight on.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We love hearing the ways that you're inspired to act after listening. Here's this from John. Quote, recently, a local library planned to hold a drag queen story hour, but ultimately canceled the event due to objections from a few patrons, despite the majority being in favor of it. In response, I wrote an email expressing my view that this is how fascism can begin and so forth, all while maintaining courteous language towards those involved. To my surprise, the librarian replied, agreeing with my opinion, and promised to forward my message on to their board members. End quote. Thanks, John, for sharing this. In related news, I wanted to alert folks that Moms for Liberty is holding their fascist summit, complete with Trump, DeSantis, Haley, and more, June 29th to July 2nd in Philly, where they'll be training their Christian fascist stormtroopers to run for school boards, terrorize teachers, students, and the LGBT community at large, aiming to erase LGBTQ folks from public life with a specific viciousness towards the trans community. And they're doing this nationwide. We'll be covering this more, including what Moms for Liberty is, the danger they pose, why they're coming to Philly, and the ways for people to act. But right here, I want to say folks should be turning up and turning out in Philly at the end of this Pride Month, this June, to defend the lives and rights of LGBTQ people, the rights of kids, to have a real education, to learn history, and against the overall fascist program they are hammering into place. As always, stay tuned on our social at Refuse Fascism. Thanks for listening to Refuse Fascism. We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, ideas for topics, guests, or lend a skill. Tweet me at Sam B. Goldman. Drop me a line at Samantha Goldman at refusefascism.org. See the show notes to find us on Mastodon or how you can leave a voicemail for us. We'd love to hear from you. Want to support the show? It's simple. Show us some love by rating and reviewing on Apple Podcasts or your listening platform of choice. And of course, follow, subscribe so you never miss an episode. And become a patron to support our pod and content creation to help people understand and act to stop the fascist threat. For as little as $2 a month, you can help make a difference in producing and promoting this independent weekly podcast. Producer, shout out to Scott G. Thanks for giving. Give today at patreon.com/refusefascism or by visiting refusefascism.org and hitting that donate button. Thanks to Richie Marini, Lena Thorne, and Mark Tingleman for helping produce this episode. Thanks to incredible volunteers, we have transcripts available for each show, so be sure to visit refusefascism.org and sign up to get them in your inbox. We'll be back next Sunday. Until then, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.